In this video, I'm going to show you some of the more advanced tricks with InDesign, so because you might want to create that as part of your layout. Here, first few I'm going to do are the actual effects: drop, shadow, feather, transparency, bevel, and emboss. And I'm going to use the text. You can do that with any object, but I'm going to use the text. So if you select the item, go into effects, and then click on the little FX button here. And so drop shadow, if I select that, gives you a dialog box. You turn on preview, you can already see the drop shadow. You can choose which direction it goes into by rotating around. You can choose the color mode, so you can make the color drop shadow a different color. You can also change how it blends, like you can use a multiply or normal or screen, and that will affect how it applies onto the screen. So if I move that on top, you can see how the blending is a little different on there. So that's a drop shadow. Feather, same place. You go into effects and go into feather. Okay, basic feather. And you can see how it became soft here. So if we go into our settings for the basic feather, we can go feather width, and I can go a little bit less maybe. And I can see how the corners, what happens to them, and that'll tell you, you can see how it gets sort of blended in there. For transparency, same place again. Go into your transparency. Actually, you can play with it right here. So it's your opacity right there. You can bring it down and play with that. You can also just work with the text by itself. So let's say you have a text box that has a color. So let's just apply color to the text box. Make that white. If I play with the overall transparency, the whole thing becomes transparent. If I just play with the fill, I can just make the fill transparent. Or I can just work with the text and make the text transparent. So you can see how different each one can be changed individually. That's your transparency. And for bevel and emboss, again, we go into effects, bevel and emboss, and you have all kinds of settings: inner bevel, outer bevel, and so on. If I bring up the amount that actually happens, so bring up the size. I'm still on the transparency tool. So let's go to the other font so we can see it a little bit better there, bevel and emboss. And now again, I can change the direction, and you can see how it will change the level. I can also change the color. So I can say, okay, what would it look like in, let's say, orange? And I can say how does it work with the colors. So you can play around with all kinds of settings in here. Endless combinations. The big warning for yearbook is always consistency. How do you make sure that not every page ends up with multiples of these and have all kinds of crazy things going on? So that's something to think about. Next, I want to show you how to embed a photo into some text. That's a very common design. So if I take that font, I can't put it into actual text, but I can put it into any shape. So as long as the text is outlined, so if I go into type and create outlines, then this is no longer text. It is now just a graphic object. Then I can take my photo and I'm going to cut it. And I'm going to select this text and I'm going to paste into. So now I've got my photo inside the text, and I can move it around just like in any other text box, and I can stretch it. And so by clicking on it, I will see the shape of it, and I can play around with where it is located and so on. So I can play around with that. That's sort of embedding the image. Another one is fitting text to path. So if I have a path like a circle, I go to my text tool, the one that says type on path, and I hover over the path. And when you see a little plus sign, you click, and then you can start typing at that place. And if you take your selection tool, you see the little boxes which show you the beginning and the ending of that piece of text. So you can control exactly where the text goes. And again, you can apply different fonts and styles and all those types of things to that. So it would work. All right, text wrap. Now we did text wrap in the earlier lessons, which was we just selected the photo and we clicked on text wrap, and the text wrapped around here. Now, two things you notice. Now my headline just went away. So one thing I wanted to show you is if you go into that and you go into object and text frame options, you can actually say ignore text wrap. And that means that even though this photo is a text wrap, this particular box is not being wrapped, but this one is. So you can see as I'm moving, the text will adjust to that wrap here. Now, that's all nice and well, if I want to wrap around the photo. But let's say I want to wrap around the geisha girl. So what I could do is I could take my text wrap and go into my dialog box for the text wrap, and I can increase the spacing, and then you can see it has a little blue outline here. I can use my white pointer tool and I can pick up these points and I can move where the text wrap goes, and I can control where the text wrap is exactly. So I could set it up like this and you can see my text wrap go around here, and that works quite well. Sometimes it's very awkward though, working from a square photo into a nice text wrap. So what I find is easier at times is just to make a brand new object using a pen tool. And with text wrap, you don't need to be super close by, but if I just go along and I can go a rough shape, because as long as the text sort of follows her shape, I go like this. I'm just going to make that an awkward shape like this. I'm going to close the shape, and now I'm going to make sure it doesn't have any color to it. It's almost an invisible shape, and I give that shape a text wrap. So now I have that object, and I can take my original photo with my selection tool, and I'm going to get rid of the text wrap that I had on that. So let me just move that out of the way for a second, and I would say no text wrap here. And so now when I bring that in, you can see how the text wraps close to the object that I had set. So if I go back to this object, there's no text wrap, and this has the outline that I created. So you can see where the text is wrapping to that object. So that's another way of creating a text wrap. The challenge is then finding that object, but if you go to your other view, you can actually see where that object is. Okay. Now, next, compound images. One neat thing you can do is if you have an image, you can create a smaller box, and using your Alt key, you can make copies of that same image. So I'm going to make a box, and I'm going to create a number of these images, and I'm going to make 4 of them. Now if I select them all together and I go into Object, Pathfinder, and I say Add, then it's going to now be one shape. So now I can hover over that shape and bring my photo in and move it around. So you can see how these 4 boxes are actually now considered one image. Cool thing is you can combine images. You can also take away things. So for example, if I take my circle tool like this one here and I bring that exactly over the point here, then I'm going to center that and select everything together again. And I go Object, Pathfinder, and I go Subtract. It will take that piece out, and so on. I can make. Another effect is that you can extract a piece of an image. So you can do that in Photoshop and bring it in, but you can also do it directly in Illustrator, in InDesign. So what I've done here, if you're looking closely, I've gone around and with my pen tool, I've created an outline of this girl. And if I don't like where the points are, I can use my white pointer tool and I can pick up the different nodes, and you want to make sure it's not selected, so you can choose individual nodes and you can move it around and you can tweak the image. If you just pick the whole thing up, if it's selected, you can move the entire mask. So it's not bad. You can see I just roughly followed her. In here, could use a little bit of tweaking, so select off it, and then you can go onto the nodes and you can modify where those nodes sit. So you can just get a nice clean selection of the object. So once I have that, now if I have that shape that I'm going to use to cut her out, this actually has to be behind the object that I want to select. So I'm going to have it selected, and I go Object, Arrange, and I'm going to send to back, so it's behind. You don't see it anymore, but it's still selected. I'm going to hold down my Shift key with my pointer tool and click on the photo as well. So now I've both selected, and then I go Object, and I go Pathfinder, and I'm going to go Intersect. So now what it's done, it's taken that frame that I created and just placed that photo inside. And if you see how pixelated it is, by the way, if that bothers you, you can go Display Performance and go High Quality, and it sharpens up images that you have saved. So you can see how that's a much better image. So I'm going to go View, Fit Spread in Window, and you can see how nice that works as an extracted image. Now, a few text tricks before I show you a little bit more complex stuff with creating images. Things like drop caps. If you select a body of text, you have drop caps tools. If you're on your text tool, not your pointer tool, so you have to make sure you're on your text tool. There you go. And then we have up here drop cap. So I can say I want this drop cap to be We can select that piece of text, and I want to have a drop cap that's 2 lines high, and I want maybe to be 2 letters wide. So that's a quick way of creating a top cap. Indents and hanging indents. If I have this here, I'm going to get rid of the drop cap on this line. And so let's say I want a hanging indent. So what you would do is you would take that text and you would indent the entire row. So give it an indent. So that's how you can indent a paragraph. I'm just doing one pica. If you want a hanging indent, then you can go a negative value and take the first row back. So you'd have to have an indent here first and then a negative indent to get the first line back. Okay. There's lots of other things you can play around with as well with shifting and alignment. So obviously I can have this here. This paragraph altogether is currently under a justified on the left. I can also center it. I can right justified, and these here line up to the spine. So that means if you move from the left side to the right side of a spread, the alignment will change based on where the spine is located. So that's your alignment. Another one is line spacing. So if I have a bunch of text here, you have your font size here, and you have your line spacing here. So you can control over how much spacing the lines take. So that's a part of the character settings. You can also shift a baseline. So you can take one line of text and you can actually shift where it is located. So by using a baseline shift, I can move it up and down. Again, something to use with caution, but it's something that sometimes a good way of tweaking something with a text wrap or a grad layout or something like that. There's also things like scaling. So let's say with those grads, if there's a name that's too long, you can select some text and you can narrow it down. So you can say, okay, I want this set of letters to be a little bit skinnier. If you do too much, it looks very awkward. But sometimes when there's a name and there's just 1 or 2 letters missing, you can just do a little bit and have it at 95% or so, and it'll look quite well. Other thing you can control is tracking and kerning. And what that means is the way that the spacing works. So let's say I pick this word here and I go in here, I can control how much spacing is between the letters. So that is that. And you can also do that with individual letters. Now, if I go in here and I use the one up here, you're not really going to notice a whole lot of difference. Where it really comes in handy is for things like text and headlines. So if I select my spacing here and I go slight minus, I can actually tuck that R under the T, and same with the E, I can tuck that under. So that sometimes looks really good when you're working with large letters, so that you don't get awkward spacing. So same thing, I could bring that K in a little bit. So that is something you want to play around with headlines.